relationship doesn't hold for the company, doesn't hold for the people. If I say the United States is the richest country in the world, it doesn't mean that because you're from the United States you must be a rich person. What holds for the group doesn't hold for the individual. And that is a maneuver that you can take with sleight of mouth, again, to cause people to rethink the relationship that they've defined. Chunking up is going the other direction. I take the elements and I generalize them to a larger classification so it doesn't hold anymore. So if I take mean things and I generalize it, it could be communicating emotionally. So saying a mean thing is communicating emotionally. That's a much bigger chunk. And I might say, well, does emotional communication make me a bad person? Well, no, the relationship doesn't hold anymore if I generalize it to a big enough classification. So chunking down is breaking it down, chunking up is generalizing it bigger. Some people typically chunk things down. A very classical kind of thing that you find in, I see this happening a lot between, say, executives and accountants. The executive comes in and they go, well, how is the company doing? And the accountant says, well, let's see, last week we made this much money, and then of course on this we had this much sales, but then we had to subtract this and this. Because I don't want to know that. I want to know how the company's doing. I'm telling you, last week we did this. This happened. Because the accountant's job is to chunk down, and the other person's trying to get the big chunk. He wants the general elements, and the other person's giving him the specific pieces. So when you think about having conflicts, you can often find that people get into a conflict because one person is looking at it from the big picture, the other person is looking at it from the immediate small details. Think about classic addictive behaviors. I need this because it's going to make me feel good in the short term, but in the long term the big picture, I won't feel good about myself. So which one do I do? If I give in and I don't have this drink now, then I'm going to feel bad. But if I do have the drink in the longer term, I'm going to feel bad. It's a matter of chunking. So chunking up, chunking down will change the implication of a belief. Let's go through some of the examples sort of quickly to build the intuition about it. I can't do X because I've never done it before. Chunking down would be to say, how many minutes or incidents of not doing something creates how much incapability? How much incapability? This person says, I can't do it because I haven't done it before. Well, how many minutes of not doing it is worth how much capability? Well, it doesn't break down minute by minute or element by element that way. The person can only perceive it in the general. If I was going to chunk up, I could take not having done it before and say, well, that's just a member of a class of not getting successful feedback. So I generalize not doing it to not getting successful feedback. It's a bigger chunk. So I go, is lack of successful feedback always proof of impossibility? I take I can't do something and generalize it to impossible. So again, on that level, the person will say, no, I guess lack of successful feedback doesn't always prove that something's impossible. And so what I've done is to generalize their belief statement to a point that they kind of have to challenge it themselves. If I care about others, they'll take advantage of me, and I want to chunk that down, I can say, well, if you only partially care about somebody else, which part of you do they take advantage of? And it's like, well, it doesn't quite hold that way. Or again, you'll notice it starts to cause you to think about the whole relationship differently. I can chunk it up. Do people always get hurt when they feel for others? Getting hurt is a bigger class of being taken advantage of, and feeling for others is a bigger class of caring for others, because there's a lot of other feelings. So what I do is I generalize that statement to incorporate even more things and see, does it still hold if I generalize it this much? If we go to, you were late, so you don't care about me. Chunk it down. How much caring was each second worth? So again, yeah, right. You gotta watch the report on that one. Or is the most basic aspect of our relationship just a matter of time? So caring, basic aspect of relationship. Late, matters of time. Again, well, it doesn't quite seem the same when you put it that way. You say mean things, so you're a bad person. We were kind of doing that one already. Which syllable that I used had the most bad in it? Chunking up. Do you think that everyone who gets a little irritated is evil? Again, chunking up bad to evil, chunking up mean things to irritated, being irritated. This house is too expensive. I can't afford it. Which parts of it could you afford? You know. How about the door? Can you get that? Window? We got about half of it that you can afford now. We can borrow the rest, and, you know. So, I mean, that's by the way, it's a strategy. You'll recognize that they do that, don't they? This, chunking it up, and instead of this house, I go to property, and instead of not being able to afford, I go to big investment. So property is a big investment. I'm chunking it up to bigger categories. Cancer causes death. If I'm going to chunk it down, what degree of death does each cancer cell cause? One cell causes one element of death. Of course, the relationship doesn't work that way. It's about thresholds. Cancer causes death. Chunking it up. Cancer is a mutation or a change in a part of a system. Death is the destruction of that entire system. So I chunk up and say, does a change in a small part of a system automatically cause a destruction in the whole system? Not necessarily. There must be other elements that are involved that determine what destroys a system or not. So again, here we see how these chunking up and chunking down, again, the goal of it is not necessarily, if you're working with somebody, is not necessarily to beat them or change their belief. It's to start getting them to think about it. Now, when you do the role plays, I'm going to assign one person to be a down chunker, one person's going to be an up chunker, so to speak. So you'll see how those things work together in an argument, because it'll be real interesting, I think, just to even do it, to find out how you take somebody's statements and keep chunking it down, and the other of you, you're going to try and keep going to the bigger elements. Okay? So, yeah, up chunking. So anyway. Now, the other two patterns. One is going to be counterexample, and one is going to be change frame size. Counterexamples. Let's go to the definition page first. Counterexample is finding an example of something that doesn't fit the relationship defined by the belief. So in other words, a typical structure of a counterexample is if somebody says, I'm a poor learner because I've never done well on tests, if I can find a test that they've done well on, that becomes a counterexample to their belief statement. If I can find very intelligent people like Einstein who did poorly on tests as well, who clearly wasn't learning disabled, that becomes a counterexample, which forces you to have to rethink about your belief. So we'll go over let's go over counterexamples as a single category. Let's go to page 1. I can't do this because I've never done it before. One creative way to respond to that would be something like, can you repeat what you just said 20 times as fast and loud as you can? You've never done that before. So, again, the counterexample being, here is something that you could do. There's also a little double bind in there. This is something that you could do that you haven't done before. So, it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't do things you haven't done before. There was a time when you were an infant and you couldn't even understand statements like you just made to me. Since you've done that before, can you do that right now? You know, in other words, can you not understand what you just said? I mean, that would be, again, an interesting double bind, but it does use a counterexample.